Hi, my name is Vanessa Carrasco, and this is my interpersonal communication project for Liberty University HSCO 508 Interpersonal Communication course. Before we begin, I want to give a basic understanding of what interpersonal communication is. In the article, Psychological Perspectives on Interpersonal Communication, Ramaraju, the author, asserted that there is a connection between psychology and understanding interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication is an act of interacting with people to build relationships and form interactions. The word interpersonal is derived from the prefix inter, meaning between, and the word person. Ramaraju also stated, "We don't just exchange words when we communicate. Instead, we create meaning as we figure out what each other's words and behaviors stand for, represent, or imply." In other words, this is the basis for our experience with one another as humans, and it is a complex experience. Without further ado, let's begin. Next slide. My presentation is going to include my overarching goal for interpersonal communication in my life, defining enlarging the conversation, identifying positive and negative influences of my background and behavior blend, defining the potential barriers within my interpersonal context, which includes noise pollution, both internal and external, and I will also be explaining how I will deal with each barrier. Toward the conclusion of this presentation, I will present a spiritual perspective as well as my action plan. Next slide. Prior to this class, I was under the impression that I am a good listener. I attributed my communication failures to my lack of word choice or relationship weaknesses. After going through this course, I experienced an epiphany that I have underdeveloped listening skills. My overarching goal is to observe conversation and to use wisdom to decipher when to talk and when to listen in order to improve my interpersonal communication experience in the workplace, at home, and in personal relationships. This overarching goal will help me to remain objective and to listen with understanding. Burley Allen states that we spend 70% of our waking hours in verbal communication. Therefore, it is important that I am aware of the bad listening habits that I have developed throughout my life, which include, but are not limited to, judgmental listening, ritual listening, Perry Mason's, why questions, I understand statements, and defensive listening. Next slide. The EMC equation is composed of identified needs plus intentional resourcing which equals enlarging the conversation. My definition for enlarging the conversation means gaining further understanding of the other person by identifying his or her needs, then exploring resources in order to meet those needs, which will then enable the conversation to grow. As part of this course, I was required to watch Fireproof, the movie, in order to gain further understanding for interpersonal communication. From the beginning of the movie, the conversation between Caleb and Catherine was one-sided. In my essay, I expressed that as a viewer, I was able to see the unspoken needs of both individuals. Caleb utilized intentional resourcing by participating in the 40-day love challenge introduced to him by his father. One of the most powerful scenes was seeing the result of the EMC equation, Caleb apologizing to his wife for how he treated her, was able to enlarge the conversation between himself and his wife to express his desire to continue his marriage with her and to work out their problems together. Next slide. My background as a listener can be described in two parts, when I'm in conflict and when I'm in conversation. My listening skills in conversation are much stronger than my listening skills in conflict, which I will describe later can be attributed to my behavior blend and personality profile. Since a young age, I have developed defensive listening, and as a talker, I tend to be defensive. We'll look more into that on the next slide. According to the Uniquely You assessment, my personality blend is outgoing and reserved personality traits that are people-oriented. This is reflected in my listening habits. This assessment provided insight into the skills I need to work on in order to become a more successful interpersonal communicator. Next slide. The next slide describes the SI personality type and what words can be associated with the S type as well as the I type. I was also profiled as being above the midline. What does that mean? According to Carbonell, that simply means that I am an overachiever. I tend to be able to please other people because I am able to become who they want me to become, because I demonstrate the personality types of the DISC personality profile. I also strive for success in all things, as well as express optimism and passion in everything that I do. The cost of being an SI and above the midline to my interpersonal communication experience is that I tend to lack expressiveness because I am concerned a lot with what people think about me. I also tend to avoid conflict. And finally, I experience a lot of stress because I put pressure on myself to please people at all times. Carbonell described this as sometimes holding on to something until I finally explode. Some people will emotionally abuse you until you can't take it any longer and respond irrationally. I need to make my needs heard and not aim to simply people please. If I have a concern, I need to learn to voice that concern in a way that allows the other party involved to gain complete understanding of my needs. This is a form of resourcing so that the conversation can be enlarged. Next slide. The potential barriers in interpersonal communication include information-seeking communication, which tends to be blocked by defensiveness. This form of communication exercises control in the conversation, which creates a negative environment, where the listener may feel put down or less than. Stewart describes this as being control-oriented, which he says leads to a subconscious perception, which gives the listener a valid basis for defensiveness, because it is assumed that the talker or speaker secretly views the listener as ignorant, unable to make his own decisions, uninformed, immature, unwise, or possessing the wrong attitude or being inadequate. This can be a huge barrier in interpersonal communication, along with ritual listening, which creates internal conversation that distracts a person from being an empathetic listener. And level 2 and level 3 listening, which is described by Burley Allen in 3 levels, and we will discuss that on a further slide. Next slide. The solution to barriers within my interpersonal communication would be descriptive speech, which Stewart describes as actually being minimizing defensive responses. This type of speech helps to eliminate implications from the talker because it's specifically information-oriented. For example, empathetic listening is a solution to barriers created by ritual listening because when dialogic listening works, well, everybody understands each other, and the people involved are co-creating understandings that go beyond individuals, according to Stewart. This is an important skill for me to work on in my action plan, which will be discussed at the conclusion of this presentation, because it addresses my overarching goal of communicating to gain understanding. As I mentioned earlier, I struggle with ritual listening during conflict. Next slide. Brammer and LaRoche state that the effects of noise on communication impact us all, irrespective of age, sex, or lifestyle, in many aspects of day-to-day living. They go on to describe that the social consequence of noise interference and the greater impact these consequences might have on individuals who suffer from hearing impairment, which may compromise his or her safety. They continue by describing the environments in which noise pollution is mostly present and should be eliminated, which would be our work environments, the schools, as well as professional environments. 2 forms of noise pollution would be internal noise and external noise. Internal noise tends to include the conversations that go on in a listener's head include, because the listener may not find the information to be interesting, they have a conflicting viewpoint of the information being presented, and they close their mind to what the talker is expressing. Examples of noise pollution, external noise pollution, include loud noises such as in traffic, alarms, or machinery, faulty acoustics, external activity that can be viewed as scenery, or talking in a public space, phone calls, and actions such as fidgeting, doodling, chewing gum. Those kind of things have been described by Burley Allen as external noise. Next slide. Some solutions to noise pollution include listening at a level 1, which Burley Allen describes as being aware and in the present moment, acknowledging and responding, not letting oneself be distracted, paying attention to the speaker's total communication, including body language, and being empathetic to the speaker's feelings and thoughts, and suspending one's own thoughts and feelings to give attention solely to listening. Burley Allen also describes perception, reception, and attention, and how they interact with one another. She states, if our perceptions are positive and non-judgmental, we will be more receptive to what is going on or being said, which in turn increases our interest or attention to the speaker. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, I will be providing a spiritual perspective. Jesus has been my example of how to listen properly. He spoke in parables, and he spoke kindly to those he interacted with. In Matthew 6:6, Jesus describes prayer by saying, "But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in the secret will reward you." This addresses the barrier of external noise. Jesus explains that we should communicate to God in a quiet area, which could be your room behind closed doors. Another verse that addresses interpersonal communication is Ephesians 4:29. Do not let unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only that what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. As a talker, it is important that before you speak, you know the words you are going to be saying are going to be positive for and conducive to effective communication with another person. And finally, James 1:22 says, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourself, but do what it says." As a result of this class, I have learned not to simply listen to what others have been telling me, or listen to the words that I've been reading throughout the textbooks, but to apply them so that I can have effective communication in the future. Next slide. My action plan includes 5 steps, which are listed on this page, and eventually I hope to achieve my overarching goal by living each day consciously aware of the listening and talking skills that I have gained from this course and applying them in every conversation. Thank you.